ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all so much for being here at this AST webinar, possibly the last webinar we attempt. Can I start by actually apologizing for the technical fault that has delayed this and all the movements around. Thank you so much, though, for sticking with us.
Yeah.
I'd like to just really briefly start off, because we'll speed up so we can get to the main event. For those of you who don't know me, I am George Percy. I'm president of the Atlantic Salmon Trust. And it's a huge honor to have you all here with us. We were about 450. We're probably about 5 people now. But of those 450 who originally joined us, we actually have people from all over the world here. We've got people from the Pacific. We've got people from river trusts, river boards, central government, and actually most importantly, and people I'd really like to thank are the people who have joined us who are part of our smolt tagging program that's been running for the last month or so. You guys have done a phenomenal effort, tagging 1,900 smolts across 20 different rivers on both coasts of Scotland in a very short space of time. Thank you all so much. And thank you also to the Macallan for hosting this event. While you're sitting in front of your computer screens, we are here in this amazing distillery on the banks of the Spey, and we are incredibly grateful. So very briefly, what's the purpose of this evening? The purpose of this evening, for me anyway, is to showcase the work that the AST have been doing. But I think it's also more than that. It's also to give a certain amount of hope, I think, to everyone out there that we are working with a number of organizations to really change things here. A lot of money is being spent on salmon conservation, and I think we can actually make a big difference. So on that positive note, I'm going to hand over to Pedro Landell, who's going to take us through this evening's entertainment.
Hi everyone, I'm Pedro Landell. I'm really sorry about that little bit of a delay. It's actually so much easier to do it in person than it is to do it on a Zoom call. We've got an amazing lineup for you tonight. We're going to start with Robson Green, who we're very lucky to have had here tonight, and he and Jim Murray went on a road to discovery. We're then going to go to Pete Cairns, who's going to talk about wilding, be very controversial, and take us right out there and show us what's possible. After that, we're going to move on, and we're going to talk to Robert and Stuart, who are from here on the estate, and I'm going to have a little chat with them. And we'll wind it up with Professor Ken Whelan, who's in Dublin. And Ken will then just finish it off with telling us about some of the other work of the AST. I'm the pilot for the night, so far we've crashed the bus, but we plan to get it back on course, and we're going to go at a hell of a rate from here on in, so please stick with us. And I'm afraid we're at this ridiculous COVID stuff whereby we all have to socially distance and do all that stuff, so I can assure you we're doing that in spades. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the head of drama. We've had a drama here tonight already, Robson.
Bit of a drama, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bit of a drama. And thanks for sticking about. It was only a short space of time, wasn't it, Pedro? I did 400 Daily Star crosswords.
Did you?
That's what it is. And a chance to shave as well.
Well done, Robson. Robson's got a sore back, so he can't get up and hit me, so I can say slightly what I like. But Robson and Jim went on a road trip, and they looked at our work. And it's so good to have another set of eyes looking at our work and informing you what we're up to. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Robson to introduce his film.
Listen, firstly, I feel incredibly intimidated, surrounded by lots of scientists and experts. And I think you may rue the day that I actually became an ambassador for the AST, because I have been catastrophically miscast in many a role. But Mark and Tiggy and the lovely Jim Murray reminded me that you don't have to be a member of Greenpeace or Extinction Rebellion to know that there is a serious issue with this extraordinary species. So we were given the opportunity to go on a road trip to discovery, and what we discovered was extraordinary. Roll VT.
The story that has unfolded over the last 2 days is an extraordinary one on a scale that I couldn't imagine.
This is a species that is iconic. It's a keystone species that is symbolic of so much more than just a fish in a river. This is a creature that represents the problems in the world today.
We spend our lives telling stories, and I think this story is a good one. It's a real one, and it's full of hope. It's got all the ingredients for a very life-affirming story.
Yeah, and I think there is hope, and as long as there's hope, we keep working to save this species.
Mm-hmm. Very good. But it's going to be a big learning curve for me, because worrying about salmon disappearing just isn't enough. It's no good going on Twitter and going, salmon are disappearing, sad emoji face.
So the reason why we're up here this time around is because we want to discover much more about this beloved fish, and not just from the end of a rod, but we want to have a look at a more 360-degree approach of the salmon and what it needs and why it's struggling so much. So we're going to meet a lot of experts, a lot of very experienced people who have given their life to try and save this wonderful species. And we want to learn and share with you our findings so that we can all become more aware of what we can do to help save this wonderful species before it's too late.
No pressure at all.
Really is it's a joyous collective thing to celebrate, but it goes beyond that, doesn't it? It's a symbol that this river is well. It's a symbol that this valley is well, and it's a symbol of
Nice
the hope
fish, fresh
that
fish.
we can share and spread about what all these rivers and valleys can potentially be like if we act now. So it's a very symbolic moment when you catch and release fish successfully. Dara, where are you, mate? It belongs to that man there. That's a big fish. That's a belter. I want to walk away after this journey of discovery and be much better educated on what it is that the problems the salmon face, and what we can do now to solve them.
And there's so many views on what the problem is, but if you actually have evidence through study and research, and they come up with a really black and white, not argument, but something you can't argue against, then surely with that you can do something about it.
So the Missing Salmon Alliance has brought together the leading salmon conservation NGOs in the UK. And it's really to combine our resources. It's not to form a new organisation, but really to bring together the skill sets that we all have. And we're all different. Where there's strengths in research, others have strengths in advocacy or communications. And we need to combine those strengths so that we can do the best with the salmon.
And one of the many things that you're doing is the East Coast or the Moray Firth smolt tagging project, which I think feeds into the Likely Suspects framework, doesn't it?
It's really that, it's part and parcel of the Likely Suspects framework, and it's really to find out, as our smolts go to sea, as they're migrating down the rivers, how are they faring, and following them for about the first 100 kilometres out to sea. And we've taken 7 rivers in the northeast of Scotland in the Moray Firth, and that's about 20% of the UK's salmon resource flows out of this single bay, and it just gets out there.
Really important, bay.
Yeah, to really understand, and that's what you need with this. You need numbers. And what we found in the first year, in 2019, was about half of the fish, on average, went missing in fresh water.
50% went missing?
50%.
I mean, like you were saying before when we were talking, you're saying in this world that we're involved in, you can't move for opinions. And there's so many opinions of why they're going missing. Yeah. Like, it's, I'm in Northumberland, they're always saying it's the seals. There's thousands of seals just at the mouth of the Tyne waiting to batter those smolts. Oh, it's actually the brown trout. So when you catch a brown trout, Robson, knock it on the head. And it's the cormorants, it's the goosanders, it's the pike, it's everything.
We don't have a shortage of opinions. I mean, if you ask 5 people, what are the problems with salmon, you're going to get 10 opinions. Yeah. So what the Likely Suspects very much trying to do is act a bit like a casualty department. It's trying to triage which one stopped breathing, because that's the one you need to deal with now. Yeah. Otherwise, it's game over. Yeah. Or what's the one with the splinter in its finger? Yeah. And so you can perhaps put that further down the list. And it's really to find out what those problems are and then deal with them.
So
The current spins the wheel and then they just fall in.
The smolts are drifting passively, floating with the current, and then they come into this big wheel here, and they can swim in, but because of these blades, they can't get back out again. And then they come all the way through into this catch box here, and hopefully there's lots of fish in it. I'll move this out of your way.
Let you lift it over.
If we sort of swap sides, if you go onto there.
Hey, Robson.
There you go.
Oh, wow.
Look at that. That's a good catch.
Look at that.
Whoa. I'll flip that out for you.
What is your take on it? Is there one main culprit for smolt in the river system, especially here?
I think it's important to think about with predation is there's a lot of human impacts that make it worse. So that's really what we're concentrating on here. Is if you've got if you have a weir in the river, it slows these smolts down, and so they become more prone to predation. So what we're really trying to do is give them a free passage on the way down, and then the predation levels drop. So this is the thing to look at. It's not just predation alone. Predation might be part of the problem, but it's made worse by man's impact on the rivers as well.
And when we're talking about percentages making it to the ocean,
yeah,
what are we talking about in a river system like how many smolt are going to make it to the ocean to be able to feed?
So we got a first view of that in 2019 when we first did this tracking study, and actually of the 100 fish that we tagged and released here, only 9 made it to the sea. So that's a 91% mortality, which is huge. Which is there's obviously real issues. So what we're trying to do is figure out where those we call them pinch points, figure out where those pinch points are, and then look at the appropriate management action to address that. So, I don't know if you want to, do you want to weigh it and to measure him? So if we just, both 2 hands, and what we'll do is we put him on the board here.
Do you want imperial or metric?
Metric.
Okay, he's 17 centimetres.
Smolt, and then we put him on here.
Sure.
And we get the weight.
Oh, he's coming around to hopefully be quick.
Fine, so just leave him in there. He'll come round.
He'll come round on his own. Really. So when you tag them,
yeah,
you do all this bit first.
It's basically the same process. You anaesthetize it, you weigh it, you measure it, just to make sure it's the right size for the tagging project.
Yeah, and you put it back in the recovery bucket.
We put it in the recovery bucket. We will leave it in there for up to 15 minutes just to make sure it's well. And all the ones we've done have come around very, very quickly, within like 2 or 3 minutes. And then we transfer them from that into one of these baskets, and we leave them in the river for another 45 minutes just to make sure that they're good and healthy. And then after that, we let them go. And we try and let them go with a number of other fish as well, so they're in a shoal when they go.
Right. There we go. Who knows? In 2 or 3 years' time, they could come back as double-figure springers, Jim.
Hopefully.
What an amazing job Chris is doing.
Isn't it?
What an amazing job everyone's doing.
Yeah.
What a great story.
So in 2019, the original project was looking at where the fish went missing. They wanted to track where they were migrating down the rivers, how fast they got there. And then when they went out to sea, they wanted to see which direction they swam in. The belief at the time, but what is still true, is, fish are leaving, going into the sea, and only about 5% are coming back. So they thought most of the losses were happening at sea. But what they found in 2019, looking at 7 rivers round the Moray Firth, they found out that on average about 50% of the fish were actually not making it to sea to start with, which was a huge surprise for people.
Can I just ask, how do you find that out? How do you know that 50%? Yeah, I know, but how does that information, how do you receive that information?
Well, we have these arrays, these acoustic receivers that are placed down the rivers and then out to the sea. We had big marine arrays which go right across the Moray Firth. They went over at Dornoch and they went over between Speybe and Brora, and then we had another one about 120 kilometres for some fish where they started from, out of Fraserburgh, and each of those records a ping from the fish's tag when they go past. And the whole project, there was about 800 fish tagged, and that was about 15 million pings. Wow. And
that's it, 15 million pings.
15 million pings, and then you get the Statos at Glasgow analyse that data.
And what are you hoping to achieve with the tracking project?
So this year, because we realised that so many losses were happening within the rivers, we wanted to, first of all, to check that the same thing happened again. It wasn't just a blip in 2019. But we also increased the resolution of the receivers in the rivers because we wanted to see within the rivers where the fish are going missing in more detail, and then we can try and figure out why.
Yeah, I mean, I've been fishing so many times, and every story you tend to hear over the years is incredibly pessimistic, but meeting yourself and Chris and all the others who are taking care of this amazing species. Yeah, so much hope. It's a really optimistic message.
Well, the team have been amazing, not just AST, but like I say, Glasgow University and all the fisheries trusts that we've been working with right round the coast of Scotland have been so just enthusiastic about the whole project.
Yeah. How important
this is. So it's been a fantastic project to work on, and everybody is really looking forward to finding out what the results are this year. So, yeah, watch this space. Yeah.
Thank you for the work you do.
Lorna. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, John.
Hi, Jim.
How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good, good. Good to see you.
See you.
The Loy.
We're on the Loy here, yeah.
Wow.
So, this is one of the main spawning tributaries of the Lochie.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a nice, pristine upland river, isn't it?
And you're heavily involved in the West Coast smolt tagging project. Tell me a bit more about that. It sounds really exciting.
This tracking project will give us a piece of crucial information that we have not had. Many of us on the ground have slightly been acting blind in a way. Is we don't know. We know a lot about salmon. We know a lot about salmon in this river we're standing in front of. As soon as it gets out there, we have very, very little knowledge of it. There's some good work. I mean, AST have been involved in some good work up in the Northeast Atlantic, the feeding grounds.
Yeah.
But you've got this bit in between is how do they get there?
Right.
And we've got all these marine developments happening, but we don't actually know the paths of the migrating salmon smolts. And if we can work out the paths of those fish, so the young fish going to the feeding grounds, then we can maybe look at protecting those migratory paths when it comes to things like marine developments, fish farms, tidal power, whatever.
Oh, okay.
You see, so this, you know, before we've been looking at applications for fish farms, for example.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's slight guesswork.
So, John, why is it so important that this becomes a collaborative process and there's such a sense of urgency to it?
But, yeah, you're right. There really is a sense of urgency to this. I mean, the Atlantic salmon is in really perilous decline throughout its whole range. But if you take this area, on work that we've done, if you go back to the 1960s, for example, 35% of salmon that went to sea came back as spawning adult salmon. Now we reckon that could be about 2%. It's a huge collapse. I mean, there is a massive pressure on Atlantic salmon from all sorts of factors. But if we don't do something, it's perfectly possible that in 10, 20 years even, this species could have gone completely from, you know, places where it really was thriving not very long ago. So we have to act, we really do.
Well, as I live and breathe. Jess Rogers, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very, very well. So I've just come from the East Coast, and they were using a rotary screw trap to catch the smolts. That's not a rotary screw trap. Well,
no.
It's a net formation. What do we call this?
So this is a fyke net.
A fyke net.
Slightly different. It's a series of chambers essentially, and it's like a funnel. So the fish will swim into the funnel, and as they come down, they get trapped. They can't get back out. Right. And then we just collect all the fish in the bottom of the
which
net,
there are quite a few.
Yes, this looks quite promising.
Oh, there's a few in there, isn't there? The tracking project on the West Coast, it's a vast program. We're talking about a huge area. What are the logistics involved? I mean, how do you actually do it? What are the nuts and bolts?
So we have 10 rivers involved, which we're going to acoustically tag salmon smolts, and then we release them to continue on their migration out to sea. Prior to that, we have deployed loads of listening stations, which will listen out for that transmitter, which will ping at a set rate. And we've deployed them out in the Minch between Skye and Uist.
So they're actually in the sea,
underwater.
Excuse my ignorance. Are these being taken out in boats and just sunk to the bottom of the ocean?
So we went out in boats and sunk them down to the bottom of the ocean.
Incredible.
So we've got, I think, 200 receivers out at sea, which will give us an idea of their migration route that they're taking. So the main array is being between Skye and Uist, but we've also got receivers around Mull, Jura, off the butt of Lewis, and West Sutherland. So we are covering a huge area to try and work out where the smolts are going.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. It's just a layman's question. Why is it important to understand the migratory habits of smolts?
There's so much development happening in our oceans now that by understanding where these precious smolts are going, that's key to knowing where you can then put developments. So if we can work out where these smolts are migrating, the exact route, then we can say, okay, this is their migration route. It should be left clear, let the salmon smolts run, and you can build elsewhere.
It's just a wonderful, life-affirming story coming across these extraordinary people. And in a way, the work they're doing reminds me of the salmon's journey. There's something working in parallel here. This is kind of subtext to this whole kind of experience. There's some qualities that the salmon has and some characteristics, but there's two that stand out. They have incredible energy and they have incredible determination. And the people I've come across have extraordinary amounts of energy, putting their time and their effort into this species. Not only hoping that it will survive, but thrive as well. And you know, it is going to take time. And it's not going to be easy. But when has anything worthwhile ever been easy?
You know, and they say hope is a passion for the possible. And I think that really resonates here with the work that the AST are doing and the Missing Salmon Alliance are doing, because without hope, there's no point in doing any of it. And without hope, the salmon has no chance of survival. So as long as we all have hope, then I think there's every chance the next generation can enjoy this fish as much as the ones before us have.
I truly believe that if you take care of a river like this, you take care of an ocean, and you take care of the creatures inside it, like the beautiful wild Atlantic salmon, it'll take care of you. Here and here. I truly believe that.
Thanks, Robson. Unbelievable. Robson and Jim really put their heart and soul into that. And I just love the bit at the end when he talks about the river valleys being made of hope, and we've got to look after them. And it's crucial that we look after these rivers all over the world, not just in the UK, but UK and Scotland particularly. And that leads me nicely onto Pete Cairns. Pete is a director of The Big Picture. He's a big thinker. He likes to tell the stories of what's going on out there, and he likes to push our brains a bit and tell us what might be if we were really to be ambitious. We might not agree on everything he says, but boy, oh boy, do we need to get challenged at the moment. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Pete, and he's going to take us on a rocket fuel ride through Wilding. Pete.
Thanks, Pedro. Screen's gone. Okay, so I'm sure that many of you recognise this spectacular view. This is the Kerrang on the Isle of Skye, of course. For most people, this iconic view symbolises what Scotland looks like, what they feel Scotland should look like. And yet this geological wonder is, for the most part, like so many others, surrounded by an ecological desert. Gone are the complex woodlands that once shaped this land. Gone are many of the animals that once lived on this land, and gone too are many of the people that once lived from this land. Despite their unquestionable beauty and drama, centuries of ecological decline means that many of Scotland's rivers, glens and mountains lie empty, muted, some might say dying. There's an illness that has taken hold. It's a condition that has led to Scotland becoming one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world in terms of the biodiversity that we've lost. It's a condition whereby most people not only accept treeless river catchments as normal, but actually cherish and celebrate them, just as they do with the Kerrang. It's a condition called ecological blindness. And this is a quote from a young ecologist, Gus Routledge. We don't see the degraded landscapes and the animals we've lost because we're not conditioned to look. And Gus is right. Most people don't see the need to fix our landscapes, so they don't perceive that they're broken. It's said that a red squirrel could once travel from Lockerbie to Lochinver without ever touching the ground, but we all instinctively know that's not been possible for a very long time. And at just 3%, our natural woodland cover is one of the lowest in Europe. There was a time, not so very long ago, when this glen would have sat under a huge carpet of carbon-storing, water-slowing, shade-providing vegetation. But today, this is an image of ecological blindness. But this is not just a story about the loss of trees. For any living system to function, a community of species needs to work together. The plants, the insects, the microlife that creates the foundation for all life. And over time, it's that foundation, the ecological engine, that has been eroded and dismantled. So this is where we've got to. We've lost all our large carnivores, most of our large herbivores, and if we're honest, we spend our time desperately scrabbling around, trying to hold on to the fragments and threads of nature that we have left. So what has this all got to do with salmon? Well, for me, the answer lies with a quote from a renowned wildlife biologist called Doug Chadwick, who says the essence of nature is wholeness, a wholeness woven from infinite complexity. Trying to save nature piece by piece doesn't make sense, even if we had all the time in the world, and we most certainly do not. And yet it's fair to say that for the last 40, 50 years, conservationists and land managers have been trying to save nature piece by piece. Red squirrels, corncrakes, capercaillie, water voles, wildcats, brown hares, seabirds. At one time or another, we've had a go at saving them all. And now it's the turn of salmon. Now, I love salmon, but if we accept that nature is that wholeness woven from infinite complexity, we can't conserve these fish in isolation. They are one component in that bigger ecological engine, and we need to fix the engine. And we need to think differently about the engine. And this is where ecological blindness often takes hold. We're so desperate to save salmon or red squirrels or pine hoverflies, speciesism sets in. We start to make judgments about those animals that are somehow more worthy of saving than others. We need to think beyond individual species, beyond the riverbanks. We need to see the big picture. We need to understand that the health of our rivers and the life within them is directly dependent upon the health of the landscapes through which they flow. We need rewilding. Rewilding is an opportunity to return abundance and diversity of life to our degraded ecosystems. It's an opportunity to stitch back together a tapestry of life where natural processes drive vibrant living systems. Processes like predation, scavenging, birth, death, decay, regeneration. These are the processes that drive every healthy living system on Earth. This looks like a simple image of autumnal birch trees, but actually this is an image that shows ecological process. Each one of those tiny water droplets has been arrested from progressing into the river behind, slowing the flow of the river. In a few weeks' time, those leaves will fall into the water, enriching the river with nutrients. And next spring, when the leaves grow again, they'll provide food for insects, birds, and fish, trout. And of course, eventually the trees themselves will die and fall into the river, creating pools for young fish. So these are much more than just trees. They're pieces of that complex ecological engine, a mosaic of channels, gravel bars, and wooded islands, where each component relies on the presence of every other component, and where death is very much part of life. The great news is that we're slowly starting to recover from ecological blindness, and that rewilding or nature restoration, call it what you will, is gathering momentum. Natural river processes are being allowed to recover in areas like Cairngorms Connect. Young forests are marching across the floodplain for the first time in generations. Rivers, shaded by corridors of alder and willow, are encouraged to run as they want to, as they need to, providing shade and enriching the water for insects, birds, and fish. This is the Upper Carron at Allerdale. This is river rewilding after 20 years. And of course, it's not just the trees alongside the river that impacts on the salmon in the river. We have to start thinking about regeneration at a catchment scale. This is river rewilding in its infancy on the Dee. And here in the Calder, these huge woody structures are being dropped into the river to improve breeding habitat for salmon and trout. Many people will be familiar with the restoration of the Rottle Burn in Angus, where a stretch of river that was straightened over 100 years ago has been renaturalised, re-meandered, and allowed to connect with its floodplain. There are more flowers, more trees, more insects, and more fish. What unites all of these actions, and many more besides, is a journey of restoration and recovery, and a recognition that the health of our rivers depends on the health of the landscapes through which they flow. Now, according to the gospel of rewilding, all species are equal. All species are just part of that ecological engine, cogs in the mechanism of life. But it's also true to say that some species are more equal than others. Now, if ever there was an animal afflicted by our ecological blindness, it's this one. This is a river catchment engineer that works for free every day of the year, slowing the water, cleaning the water, and making conditions better for dragonflies and amphibians. They love beavers. Golden-eyed ducks love beavers. Woodpeckers love beavers. And if you speak to a Norwegian salmon, they will tell you they love beavers. It seems very odd to me that we're prepared to incur the considerable cost of replicating the work of beavers, and yet I suspect many people watching this remain resistant to their expansion. If we accept that we cannot save nature piece by piece, we can't just pick and choose those animals we like and turn our backs on those that we don't. But river rewilding is actually not about beavers or salmon or trees. It's about people. It's about overcoming ecological blindness. The key to the rewilding door rests with people, their perceptions, their values, their belief systems. 2021 marks the beginning of the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. This is the first time there's been a global movement to restore and recover our degraded living systems. And if Scotland is to play its part, there needs to be a transformational change in our thinking. So what to do? Well, I believe for starters, we need three things. Number one, scale and ambition. The time for tickling this problem around the edges has passed. Number two, collaboration. No single landowner, no NGO, no organisation can deliver that scale and ambition on their own. And number three, compromise. We can waste huge amounts of time and energy arguing about details that we may never agree on. It's much, much more productive to pick the low-hanging fruit and start and focus on common ground. And with just 35% of Scotland's rivers protected to any significant degree by woodland, with water temperatures rising to levels that salmon can't tolerate, that common ground is staring us in the face. The salmon needs the forest needs the salmon, and Scotland needs them both. Thank
you. Pete, really good. It's what we've got to do within the Atlantic Salmon Trust is push the envelope. And all the time we've been involved, we've pushed the envelope on all the different projects that we've had. I'm going to bring over Stuart Cassells and Robert Mitchell. They're from Macallan Estate, and in some ways, they're exactly what Pete's just been talking about and what we're going towards. And I'm just going to have a brief chat with them. I'm going to keep it as short as possible because of our little glitch at the beginning. But I'm going to ask Robert, first of all. Robert, how long have you been on the Spey?
I've been on the River Spey now for 26 years as a gillie.
So in that time, you will have seen enormous change.
Yeah, I've seen a big change, Fishing as a youngster and then becoming a gillie is leaving school and doing this as a career. Yeah, I've seen a huge decline in salmon, you know, and yeah, it's worrying, very worrying.
I think a lot of us on this call remember the days back when the fish used to come into the pool. And would you like to describe what you saw on the Tay at the end of the season?
So I was telling a story the other day about my younger days, passing my test, going down to the River Tay after finishing the season on the Spey. And this was a Pacific beat where it came off the Lindpool down to the weir at Stanley, and it was just full of autumn fish, you know, absolutely jam-packed. And I've gone there every year since as a guest, and that same pool, not the same. Be lucky if you see 3, 4 through the day from hundreds.
And I think the other thing that we discussed before this thing this evening.
For me, when you saw that starting through middle of April into mid-May, and you would see the smolt runs coming down, it was every day you saw juvenile fish. You know, every day you see good pods of these little smolts coming downriver, migrating. And you don't see that the same. You just see that maybe once a week. You know, you just see a little spell, the correct height and temperature. So you see big changes over my time, certainly.
Brilliant. Well, Robert's a proper enthusiast, and if anyone wants to come and fish here, you should try and get hold of him. Stuart, you're responsible for the estate here, and I don't know, a lot of us who walked into this building, trust me at home, it's absolutely incredible, and it's a hell of a lot better than a frigging Zoom call, that's for sure. But if human beings can make structures like this, what's Macallan's view of the sustainability of your estate and how you see it sustaining for the future?
We absolutely are committed to the sustainability of this estate. The Macallan has drawn inspiration from our estate here and from the River Spey for nearly 200 years now, and it's absolutely our duty to ensure that the next generation of people, we want the Macallan to last for the next 200 years and beyond, and it's obviously our duty to ensure that the next generation beyond us here take this in even better condition than we found it in, and we're absolutely committed to everything we can do to preserve that.
And we better quickly talk about the fact that the Atlantic Salmon Trust and Macallan have got our own whiskey, and that's pretty important, isn't it?
Yeah, last year we launched a bottle called, it's the Macallan Edition 6, a new product, and it's to celebrate really the Spey and our partnership with the Atlantic Salmon Trust. And you know, we want to play a role. We see our responsibility as being proprietary owners on the Spey to play our part in ensuring that we can support the sustainability and the great work that the AST are doing for the salmon. Salmon and the Spey is the lifeblood of this part of Scotland, and the Macallan is absolutely committed to what we can do there.
Fantastic. I think what we're hearing here is an industry that is now working with a conservation group in order to make massive change. And we've got to make that model work across all industries, be it aquaculture, wind farms, oil, whiskey. We've got to find a way of all working together in order that we can live up to where Pete was talking about earlier. That leads me beautifully on to moving out to Dublin, where we have Professor Ken Whelan. Ken's an Irishman through and through, and being an Irishman, he'd probably love a dram. But as he didn't make it here, he can't have one. But I'm gonna hand over to Professor Ken Whelan, who's our research director, and he's going to take us through a very short presentation on the other work of the AST. We've seen what Robson and Jim did, and it would be very nice to see Ken, if you can, give us a whistle-stop tour of the work of the AST. That's really kind. Thanks. I hope we're over at Ken. Ken, are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you now, Pedro. Thank you very much indeed.
Well,
that's great.
I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you, Ken.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Pedro. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be with you here this evening. And I'm going to give you a very short presentation, as Pedro was saying, and to talk you through some of the research that we've been doing in AST. And in many ways, I think it echoes really what Pete was saying, in that, Pete, we are really looking towards scale and ambition in absolute bucket loads. Because in reality, what we're looking to do is to try and encompass the whole life of the salmon. And we're going to look at the salmon not alone in freshwater, but we're going to look at the salmon right across its life. And certainly you will have seen from the earlier presentations, particularly the comments that John made in the film, that we're looking at a really serious issue now, just to reinforce some of the numbers. So 30, 40 years ago, it wasn't at all unusual for 25 fish out of every 100 smolts to return as grilse. And now what are we looking at? We're looking at, in terms of grilse, probably 5. In terms of the larger fish that John was speaking about, perhaps 2. And by any standards, that in reality is absolutely catastrophic. And certainly we really do need to think our way through in terms of what exactly we're going to do about this particular problem. We have combined with all of our other fellow NGOs in the context of the new Missing Salmon Alliance. And through the Missing Salmon Alliance, we are very, very focused in terms of trying to bring the magnitude that's required to deal with these particular problems. And certainly in the context of what's been achieved to date, it's nothing short of spectacular, because the Missing Salmon Alliance has managed over the last couple of years to raise millions of pounds in terms of support for the work of the Atlantic Salmon Trust and, of course, the partners within the Missing Salmon Alliance. And this work is very much focused, as I was mentioning, across a broad swathe of different areas. We mentioned in the film this fantastic project that we have on hand in terms of the Moray Firth Tracking Project. And the Moray Firth Tracking Project, important as the tracking is, it is in fact, again, just one cog of the wheel in the whole spectrum of different areas that we're dealing with. So in addition to the tracking work that we're involved with, we're also involved in modeling. We're working with our French colleagues to look at how we can integrate what we know about the salmon at sea, to integrate that with what we know about the salmon in freshwater. And we're also working on predation, and we're working on the impacts of a whole range of different areas, including the impacts that we have inherited in terms of the impacts from aquaculture. And the system that we're using to try and integrate these particular components is called the Likely Suspects Framework. And I'll deal with that in a little bit more detail in a few moments. But certainly in terms of the tracking information that's coming from the East Coast and the tracking information that's coming from the West Coast is being integrated through that Likely Suspects Framework. And the framework is designed so that it can take all of the various theories that certainly any of you that are fishermen or any of you that spend time on riverbanks, you're well aware that there's a whole range of different views. Some anglers will tell you, oh, it's seals. Again, as was said in the film, other anglers may very well say, well, it's predation from certain fish species. But in reality, we need a technical system that can actually integrate all of that information and that give us a very clear insight into what exactly is what are the priorities in terms of the factors that are affecting the survival of the fish at sea. The West Coast Tracking Project was initiated by Marine Scotland, and indeed they have been very generous in terms of the support they've given us, along with industry, so that we can carry out what is a really very extensive programme throughout the Isles on the west coast of Scotland. And as I mentioned, the Likely Suspects framework is the method whereby we're going to integrate all of the information that becomes available to us. And it's going to give us the facility to be able to really tell where exactly the problems are happening, why the mortality is happening, and indeed the causes of that mortality, which really for the very first time will give us an opportunity to be able to look in detail at the actual actions that we can take to try and reduce at least some of these impacts. But obviously, this is going to be a very expensive and a medium to long-term operation. And we need to be very certain that the actions that we are taking are evidence-based. And that's really what the Likely Suspects framework is going to provide us with. And if we are going to integrate all of this information, if we are going to embark on this very, very complex modeling exercise, we also need examples that we can show people that what we're doing is practical, that it's realistic, that real results may emanate from what we're doing. So what we have done, we have combined forces with the proprietors of the Laxford along the west coast of Scotland. And that is going to be our exemplar. That's going to be one of the rivers where we're going to attempt to try and rebuild the actual stocks of salmon in that particular system. And we're going to see, can we take the results from what is a very complex scientific operation and apply them directly to a river between the riverbanks that Pete was talking about. And I absolutely concur with what he was saying. We can't really look at this in isolation. We have to look at it in the context of an integrated approach. What's called an ecosystem approach in the marine world is equally valid in terms of what we're going to be doing in freshwater. So in the context of the work that we're going to undertake, what then is my take-home message? Well, my take-home message is that if we are going to preserve these magical creatures, and if they are going to flourish into the future, we really do need to give them time and space. We need to give them time and space to adapt. And also we need to give them what they crave, which is cold, clean water.
Conversation here about changing the program. We're not going to do that. We're going to keep going. So I'm going to host a little bit of a Q&A. We've had some questions, and I'm going to get the answers as quickly as I can so that people can go and enjoy their supper and a glass of whiskey if they were so inclined. Ken, back to you, if I may. We've shown in the Moray Firth and also not yet on the west coast, but certainly in the Moray Firth, there's a lot of mortality happening in fresh water, which we need to sort out. So why bother with the sea?
Well, I think it's really not an either-or question, in that there's a real need, I think, to look at the whole life cycle of the salmon. And I think if we are going to lose salmon for whatever reason, it really is a matter of looking at both areas rather than picking one. And we really do need to consider that if one fails, that we have lost the salmon completely. So as I mentioned earlier in terms of the Likely Suspects framework, it will allow us to work out where exactly the fish are dying, why the fish are dying, and indeed that it will allow us to look at what can be done to protect these wild salmon. And whether that's planting a bankside of trees, as we mentioned earlier, to provide the cold, clean water that I mentioned, or indeed establishing controls for the giant pelagic fishing fleets which operate on the high seas so that they can only fish at specific times. We need a wide range of initiatives. And that's really what we need to ensure that the overall pressures on our stocks are greatly reduced. And we also need to understand what to do in freshwater and how what is happening in freshwater and what is impacting on the salmon in freshwater. How is that legacy carried over then into the marine world? And certainly, whatever the pressures are on salmon numbers, we need to act fast because increasingly we are seeing just how climate change impacts are actually intensifying those pressures, both in the catchments and at sea. And it's very encouraging to see that we have some friends from the Pacific on the call with us this evening, because certainly, as we have learned through our collaboration with our colleagues in the Pacific, certainly over recent years in the Pacific, they are seeing trends that are very, very similar to the Atlantic. So to summarize, what we're doing is we really need to look at the broad swathe of issues, both in fresh and salt water, and we need to be courageous in terms of making those decisions to move ourselves forward.
Thank you very much, Ken. I'm now going to move from a professor to an actor. And,
it's the same thing. It's the same thing.
And Robson, you did your journey to discovery with us, and you went round. And a question that comes to a lot of people is, you know, is this science worthwhile? I mean, is it something that we should look at? And from your seat, where you sit, how did you find the work we're doing and whether it's worthwhile?
Well, I feel it has to be science-based. I mean, I'm sure Robert agrees that in the world of fishing, you can't move for opinions, you know, and theories and hunches. When I was growing up in the 70s, I was told it was the seals that were eating the salmon, and the seals, certainly at the mouth of the Tyne, from hundreds in the 70s, there's now thousands there. So it stands to reason they've all got to be eating. And then the cormorants are set free. There's a plague of cormorants on the Tyne at the moment. There's goosanders, brown trout are battering the salmon eggs. But you've got to think, and I was told this by Mark, that surely these creatures have existed, a balanced existence, for millions and millions of years. So are we saying in a very, very short space of time, they're going to eat themselves into extinction? And it was interesting being alongside an expert like Chris Conroy, who's just, you know, in layman's terms, just said, this is what a weir does in a river. This is what a barrier does in a river. It slows the smolts down. And I didn't know that a smolt swims backwards. I didn't know that. It goes down against the current. Of course it does. It makes common sense. And therefore, not only are they swimming backwards, but the weir and the barrier will slow them down. So they're more prone to predation. So that's a man-made issue. Are there issues at sea where they're being starved, their feed's being taken away? Is it climate change? Is the water temperature rising? Is it pollution? Is it overfishing? I'm not sure it's fly anglers that are putting a dent in the big numbers, but we all agree that the graph is going in the wrong way. But everything has to be evidence-based. And what I learned from being alongside experts and scientists, that what we need for the policy changes is evidence. And that's what you guys provide. And therefore, with that, we can bring about change. And so not only, as we said in the film, would these species survive, but they will thrive. You know, I'm sure we all agree, eternity is too long a time to stay in the wrong place. And I think the work you guys are doing is incredible.
Thanks, Robson. I think that brings me to someone who we haven't featured yet tonight, which is Mark Bilsby, who's the Chief Executive of the Atlantic Salmon Trust. Mark really earned his crust about 40 minutes ago when he was running around kicking computers and pulling people's hair out and saying, let's get this show on the road. So I trust you. He's a great operator, Mark, and he's made a huge amount happen over the last 3 or 4 months with these tracking projects. But Mark, one of the key questions which we get asked all the time, which is on aquaculture. And should it be that we go in with the industry to help us track these fish? Does that surely not sway us the wrong way? And it's a key question, which I know a lot of people out there will be wanting us to answer.
Yeah, I think understanding where young salmon go is one of the key steps in working out how best to protect them from whatever impact it is. And there's a whole range of impacts out there. And that goes back to our sole aim as the Atlantic Salmon Trust. And that's to ensure as many wild salmon survive as possible. Now, to get this insight, we need really good, robust and independent science. And that's why the project partnership behind the West Coast Tracking Project, comprising of Marine Scotland, Fisheries Management Scotland and ourselves, set up a governance group to separate the funding from that rigorous, robust science. And it's because you need that independence and to have that rigor when you're looking at these tricky issues that you need that governance group. And we also brought in Glasgow University, who are helping us out with the science on the ground and helping us to deliver the project. We also have our staff, who are quite, I think you met some of them on the film, but there are others, but they are fiercely independent and robust about the science. So we need to get to that science so we get to the answers so that we can protect the fish, and that's our aim. And I think we need to take people with us on this project, because if we're wanting to protect these wild salmon, shouting from a corner doesn't cut it anymore. You need to be able to take people with you if you want to affect change. And doing that in a partnership is the best way to make that happen, because you need to get buy-in from people who can make the decisions and who can make the changes that are needed to protect wild salmon.
Fantastic, Mark. I can hear people at home thinking aquaculture, they are the enemy and hissing and fizzing, but they are a reality and we have to work with them to see how we can take things forward. Speaking of which, I suspect lots of people at home listening to Pete Cairns earlier would have been asking all sorts of questions. And I'm going to ask Pete a quick question. There is no doubt that the thermal maps of Scotland make a massive dent in about 10 to 15 years' time on what's going to happen to our smolts. So Pete, if you had a wish as to how we can get forestry out there, how do we make that happen?
Well, I think, first of all, there's maybe a difference between forestry and what I was talking about, which is a sort of woodland ecosystem. So well I just pull it. I mean, I think at the moment...
It's been a hard night.
I know it has, Pedro. But seriously, I think, you know, what you said there, mistakenly, is kind of symbolic of the way we think. And at the moment, there's a craze about trees. You know, getting trees in the ground is the thing everybody has to do. But there's a massive difference between trees and woodland, in the same way that there's a massive difference between salmon and the salmon ecosystem and everything that it entails. So I think apart from anything else, we've got to change our thinking, which is what I was trying to allude to. But really, I mean, I'm assuming, I hope that there's a lot of people watching this evening who are in a position to create new native woodland and to create wetlands and to create a whole range of habitats, or restore them perhaps more accurately. And I think if you are in a position to affect that, then you know, there's no time to lose. This is a really urgent situation. It's a situation that has very quickly evolved from being a conversation that you guys, salmon anglers, have, and even a conversation that environmentalists have, to a question that affects the whole of society. Climate breakdown, global nature loss, they're inextricably linked. Salmon are caught up in that downward spiral, and as individuals and as a society, we've got to all take responsibility and all take action.
Brilliant. We could go on all night, and unfortunately we've overrun by miles. So I'm going to ask, we're going to move on to the prize draw, which happened earlier this evening. I want to thank Rip Sporting and Peter Rippin, who donated the fishing on the East Ranga. We've raised over £15,000 doing it. I also want to thank Field Sports Journal, who have done an amazing job at publicising our work and also publicising the Ranga. But Robson is going to announce the winner, and we will try and say a few words about him if we
Come on, let me come over to you, Pedro. How's your evening been, Pedro? How's it been?
It's been rocking.
Look at him, it was a stressful start. The lad's only 36 years old. Look at him. Bless. Yeah, well, the winner of this amazing prize is off to the geological marvel that is Iceland. And I have fished there. I've been fortunate enough to fish there with my great buddy Jim Murray, and we've caught a few in our time. But they're off to the beautiful spot called East Ranga, and I fished that beat, and it is spectacular. And the winner, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, is Jim Hockey, or as Ken correct me, Hockey, depending where you live. So Jim Hockey or Jim Hockey. Imagine if there is a Jim Hockey and a Jim Hockey watching this. This could get tricky. But anyway, you're going to the East Ranga, but you're going with the guest. It's a +1. And Jim Hockey, mate, I'm windswept and interesting, and deep down, I know I am funny. And I know where the fish are lying. Anyway, congratulations.
Okay, so there's nothing like a free Zoom call or even a free YouTube call or whatever bloody call we're on at the moment. But so tonight is about the Salmon Club. The Atlantic Salmon Trust, its head office costs about £400,000 a year to run. We raise about £2 million in project money to run our different projects in that zone. Organisations like Marine Scotland support us through that, and we're incredibly grateful. So the money that comes our way is incredibly important. You hopefully were sent an email. You've probably had hundreds of emails tonight. You were sent an email to say, join the Salmon Club. Please go and join the Salmon Club. It's £250 a year. And if you felt like joining the President's Club, then send us an email and we'll get you on board.
Come on, Pedro, you've got to zip it up a bit. It's not please give us £200. Just put your hand in your pocket and get yourselves into debt. You know, I'm in debt up to here. I wish I was taller. I promise you, if somebody tried to rob me today, it would just be practice for Pedro.
Okay, well...
Yeah, fancy that? No, it's for a really, really good cause. And I think we are required to do these things like the salmon is required to travel upstream. And I think the people like the salmon who are involved in this are incredibly determined and motivated. And like that incredible fish, you know, they'll not stop until they get to where they need to be, Pedro.
And if you're a member of the Salmon Club, you can come. George, come over. You can come.
Come on, George.
You can come over. You can come to George's place at Syon Park in London on the 30th of September, and you can have a barbecue down there as a member of the Salmon Club. So we would we're very grateful to George. And without further ado, I'm going to ask George to sign us off for the evening and say thank you to who needs to be thanked. So thank you, George.
Not at all. Look, thank you to everyone here who actually joined on this call both times, first and second. Thank you to everyone who has made it all the way up to the Macallan. Thank you very much to the Macallan for providing us with this amazing venue and for, well, hopefully about to provide us with a huge amount of whiskey. And have I missed anyone out?
Probably.
No.
Doesn't matter.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you so much.
Lads, I've given up on all beers, wines and spirits in the worst 10 minutes of my life.
It's only Robson. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, everyone.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks for tuning in. We love you. Have another, mate. You deserve it.